What is going on, everybody? My name is Dakota, and welcome back to Cologne. Today, we're going to be looking at and reviewing a 2024 release, and that's going to be the new Rasasi Hawas Black. Let's get into it. Alrighty, so my bottle of Hawas Black finally showed up a few days ago, and I've been able to wear it once or twice since then. And this may be one of the most controversial fragrances of 2024 because a lot of people was questioning whether or not this was even a real release. This fragrance definitely feels like it came from Hawas just because of some of the properties it goes into. We'll get to that here in a second. But I definitely think this is a legit drop from them. Unfortunately, sometimes websites and even some employees don't really tend to know exactly what or when has been released. Basically, between the digging around I was able to do, just Googling stuff, talking to people in forums on Facebook groups, pretty much the American market was not supposed to be released yet. By what I was able to find, apparently this was supposed to be released like somewhere in the mid to end of November, and the American distributors jumped the gun. But now that we got out of the way, we are going to start off the way we always start off. We're going to be showing off the atomizer. And the atomizer is exactly what you would expect from Hawas. A lot of juice comes out of this thing. It's not pressurized, but it just moves a lot. It's got a good burst. It's got a wide burst. Luckily for me on this one, if y'all watched my Hawas Ice video, this one didn't fall apart the way that one did, so that's a plus. But what you get when this thing first hits the air is a fragrance that is incredibly thick. This fragrance also seems to be very deep. There is kind of a lot that goes into this, and oddly enough, what my nose picks up when it's in the air is not any note that's listed in this, because when I feel like it gets in the air, I feel like I get a pepper note in there. I get a little bit of spice in there. I get a little something that's very sharp and a little edgy. And the opening notes on this is supposed to be like citruses and grapefruits and stuff like that. And that's just not really what I get on the opening. Now, a few minutes after that, yes, but just on the initial spray, I get like a peppery, spicy note coming out of this. I'm not really sure where that's supposed to be at. But what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and put 2 there on the wrist. And speaking of putting a spray there on the wrist, one thing I'm going to go ahead and get into now is this fragrance is an incredibly thick, heavy, oily fragrance. So as you can see right here, this is like a dark ambery, and like even when you kind of churn it up, it doesn't really make that many bubbles. This is an incredibly oily fragrance. So when you do put this on, if you decide to get this, be very wary of putting it on any light clothes or on your clothes in general. If you do decide to put it on your clothes, kind of keep the spray away and then let it pull back into you, because this will stain your clothes. But what you get on the opening when it first hits your skin, it's not a fragrance that's gonna blow you away as far as like scent profile. This is gonna be one of those fragrances that's probably gonna smell familiar to you. But as this is drying down a little bit, what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and go over some of the notes. So the top notes on this are going to be pineapple, grapefruit, and bergamot. And like I said, you don't really get that on the opening, or at least I don't, when you first spray it. Now, after a few minutes, you do get a heavy dose of what I feel like is like a pineapple and grapefruit mixed, because it's very tart. Some of that citrusy does come through, and it has like an edge to it. And this is not one of those fragrances that has like a smooth blend to it, because that is not what this is. This fragrance is a little bit harsh. The middle notes on this are going to be cedarwood, patchouli, and jasmine. And you don't get very much of that jasmine coming off this. You get a little bit of that patchouli because it is just a little bit of green, and you don't really get much of the cedarwood either. Honestly, this doesn't really become a woody fragrance until it gets further into the dry down. And then the base notes on this are going to be oak moss, more wood notes, and amber. And you do kind of get a heavy dose of that oak moss when this starts to dry down, because it does get a little bit dirty, it does get a little bit earthy, and that's kind of what you get after about that 20-minute range. This fragrance, for how oily it is, does dry down relatively quickly. So probably the biggest change from the opening to the dry down, some of the citrus notes in this dies off a little bit. The fragrance kind of stays a little bit edgy, it stays a little bit sharp. Again, this is not one of those like super smooth fragrances. This one does have some rough edges to it. But in a weird way, I kind of like some of the rough edges. Sometimes it's nice wearing a fragrance that's not just like supremely smooth. And I know that sounds weird, but if you're someone who just enjoys fragrances or enjoys the process of fragrance making and stuff like that, it's kind of nice to have like a switch up, change of pace, just to kind of give you a different perspective on some fragrances. So now we're going to get into the price, performance, and availability. So the price on this is somewhere going to be in that 40 to 50 bucks. Availability wise, it's only going to be pretty much online retailers or discounters or something along that nature. I got this bottle off of Joma. I want to say it was $44 after a discount, somewhere in there. So all in all, for what you get, honestly, not too bad. Because the one thing I will say, and that's what we're getting into right now, is the performance on this thing is a monstrosity. So the longevity on this fragrance legit is like 14, 15 hours. This fragrance is an all day, all night. This one will stay with you forever. The sillage on this fragrance is huge. You leave a 3 and 4 foot cloud on this thing, and the projection just as big. Like, this fragrance is loud, and it will not leave your skin unless you scrub it off. Like, if you get in the shower and you just take a normal shower, this fragrance will stay on you. Whenever I got this bottle in, I put it on about mid-afternoon. I took a shower that evening. The next morning, it was still on my skin. It was a skin scent, but you could still very clearly smell this. So Hawas, doing what they do, definitely lived up to that performance, because the regular Hawas, the Hawas Ice, and this one, all of them have nuclear performance, but this one is the best performing out of the three by far. But as this gets into the deepest parts of the dry down, one of the things that you're left with whenever you wear this fragrance is some of the wood notes do get a lot stronger, and that moss note really starts to come out. So when this gets all the way into the dry down, to me, it's a very earthy, it's very mossy. It's got a little bit of a green vibe to it, but it's kind of like a dirtier green. To me, this doesn't really have a whole lot of sweetness going into this. It's very much like a dark, rich, earthy style of fragrance. Now, you still get hints of the citrus notes floating all the way through it, but the citrus notes on the dry down become a background note to me. You don't really pick them up unless you kind of look for them. Like I said, that moss, a lot of the wood notes, some of the jasmine just a little bit, and it stays pretty heavy, and some of that heaviness has a warmth to it. So this is one of those that this is going to be a dark fragrance. So now what we're going to get into is, I normally don't like to watch other people's videos of a fragrance that I plan on reviewing, only because I kind of don't want my own opinion to be skewed by someone else's. I kind of like to build my own opinions and kind of build my own little profiles for all my fragrances. But one thing I saw in this is everybody said that this was supposed to be some form of a Venice Absolute, maybe not clone, but extremely inspired by. And I don't have a bottle of a Venice Absolute, but if I had a decant of it, and I saw a lot of people say that this smells more like Nichonet's Hashivat than it does Absolute. Well, to me, those two kind of smelled similar. So this one definitely falls inside that wheelhouse. But the one thing where I'm going to say this kind of stands away from the other ones is, even though it does smell, I would say probably 80% similar, this one to me goes in a much darker direction. And it goes, I don't want to say a richer direction, because of the fragrances that I just listed, this one definitely smells the most synthetic. So this one does kind of have some of that like hard, punchy kind of vibe to it. Like I said earlier, like this one's rough, it's not very smooth. Both Hashivat and Absolute, those are extraordinarily smooth fragrances. Now, whether you love them or not, the blend on them was done exceptionally well. But it feels like there's a heavy dose of maybe some pepper or like a cinnamon. There's something in this that is just kind of got a spiciness to it that you get from the moment you spray it all the way into the dry down. And it kind of tricks your nose up a little bit, because when I first got my nose on this, because I did see the comparisons to Hashivat and Creed, Venice Absolute and stuff like that, I expected it to be different, but not so different. But when I actually got my nose on it, to me, this is way darker. It's way spicier. There's something in this kind of messes with my nose a little bit. I'm not saying that it's a bad fragrance, but this fragrance to me might be a little bit of a hard wear, only because there is just something in this that's kind of fighting with my senses a little. And honestly, that's almost a little bit disappointing, because for the performance you get out of this thing, so to have such a strong, overpowering, almost overbearing performing fragrance, and having a fragrance like that fight with your senses almost sucks a little, because it's going to be hard to wear this the way I would like to wear it. Hawas is one of those fragrances to where if you overspray it, it's very easily lead to a headache. Even the very limited of sprays I've put on this, it still kind of finds its way to get there a little easier. I wore it. My wife says this one's just kind of okay. It's definitely not one of her favorites. She thinks that this has like a really big smoke note to it, like, because the first time I wore it, she got like a really big smokiness out of it. I don't know if it's a mind trick or what, but every time I wear this, we almost get like a different perception out of it. The one thing that's been a constant though, like I said, is some of that spiciness, is maybe like some of that pepperiness or something like that. And pepper's not listed anywhere in it, so maybe it's the way that it was blended that's kind of, there's something in here just giving it some of that. But if I had to give this fragrance a rating right now, I would say for what they were going for, if what they were going for was like an absolute Hachivat, something like that, if they were going for a wheelhouse of inspired by, they probably did a knockout job on this, because it does smell similar enough. And with the performance and everything you get out of this, knockout. So I would probably give this like an 8.5 or a 9 if they were going that route. For my personal taste, for my nose, and again, this is just opinion based, I would give this one like a 7, just because, like I said, there's something in this that plays with your senses a little bit, and not in the good way. But if you're someone who hasn't absolutely loved the Aventus or the Hachivat kind of DNA, which that's where I fall. This is going to be a hot take. I'm not the biggest fan of Creed Aventus. I never have been. I thought Aventus Absolute was okay. It's not a fragrance that I really loved. Or I understand like what that did to the fragrance community and stuff like that, but for some reason, I was never able to fall in love with that fragrance. And this to me could be why my opinion of it may be not negative, but maybe not as high as some other people's. But I do think that's going to get us wrapped up. I'll go ahead and try to get in on this bottle. It kind of fights my ring light pretty bad. As far as bottle goes, the bottle's really good. It still has like that snake cap. It's a snap cap. And like I said, I kind of like how they radiant in the sides where you can see through it, but it's completely blacked out on the front and the back. So as bottle quality goes, I think I like this one the most. This one is definitely my favorite. But that is going to get us wrapped up. As always, thank you everyone for watching. Thank you everyone for subscribing, for sticking around, staying tuned, watching the videos, the feedback, the comments, everything. I truly do appreciate that. So sincerely, thank you. And as always, we'll see you next time.